Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for this session of the Veguary Black History Month event. We're going to be talking today with Miko Brown. I am so excited. Just I've known of Miko for a few years now, but just never ended up in the same, space where we could really just sit down and talk and really get to know each other. But I definitely always wanted to, because I could just tell, this is just a really powerful, passionate, compassionate person. And so, I'm really so thankful, Miko, that you took the time to talk with us today.
Mm.
So I want to go ahead and read this bio, which is really impressive. Just like everybody who we've been featuring, bio is like 17 paragraphs. We're all bosses, is
Yeah.
basically what's happening here. So Miko Brown has been working with nonprofit and governmental organizations over the past decade to help foster a more just and compassionate world in partnership with individuals and communities throughout the United States. She's currently Farm Sanctuary's manager of social justice programs, where she works to develop social justice programming to support critical thinking about the ideas and history underlying the dysfunction of our modern food system and culture, and where she helps to facilitate organizational social justice and equity initiatives. Just wow, already, right? She also previously worked as Farm Sanctuary's intern program coordinator and later as the Los Angeles area humane educator, where she established a new Southern California in classroom program, Meet the Animals, a virtual tour of Farm Sanctuary. Miko received her master's degree in social change and has contributed writing to the anthology Veganism of Color Decentering Whiteness in Human and Non Human Liberation, edited by Julia Felice. And the story of her work is featured in the book A Better World Starts Here Activists in Their Work by Stacey Russo. So, wow. That is, that was a mouthful, and we are really going to get into like what all of that means, because this is such like important and pivotal work to be happening at this, especially at this day, in this day and time. So but first of all, I wanted to kind of get some of your story. So when did you realize that you felt a connection to animals?
Yeah. Well, I want to first start by saying thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be in conversation with you here, Brenda. And when I think about when I first felt a connection to animals, it's actually really interesting. When I was younger, I was deathly afraid of dogs because of these like traumatic experiences I'd had as a kid. Where I'd been attacked by dogs. So I was afraid of animals. I have all these memories. But what happened was that my parents, in part, I think, wanting to help me get over it, adopted a puppy.
Oh.
And so, but this puppy, I was scared of her. And on the first night, I had my door open and she came into my room and she bit me.
What?
And so, so it just like reaffirmed for me, like, okay, no, like they're scary, it's not safe. But interestingly, what happened was that because we now had her as part of our family, I got to know her and I got to understand her. And I got to the point where even though she would still occasionally bite people, I understood that that was her way she had for being able to communicate that she didn't want to be picked up, that she didn't want to be interacted with. And getting to know her kind of had this recognition for me as a young child. I think I was around like maybe 5 or 6, but this kind of recognition that, oh, there's a person in there,
Mm.
that there's something in me that's also in her, just this recognition of a shared personhood. And so I think over the years, as we spent time together and we kind of grew our relationship, that recognition of shared personhood kind of grew into love with this particular being that I got to know, and who was so formative, or such a huge presence for me in my childhood. So I think that was where that connection really began. And I think it's interesting. People see me doing this work and they kind of assume, oh, she's doing that work because she loves animals. But I don't really think about it in that way. It's more so just this recognition of that shared personhood, and doing this work in solidarity with them, recognizing that. Um,
Wow. Okay. All right. And like, so what motivated you to take a job specifically like with farmed animals? I mean, because you had this experience with the dog, so you could have gone and worked at like, a dog shelter or something. So like, why farmed animals?
why farmed animals specifically? Yeah, so I think why farmed animals specifically was because when I'd gone vegan, so I'd learned about the issues in our food system. I learned about how farmed animals were treated, and I think growing up, I'd kind of always had this sense of like, I have this relationship with this particular animal that's kind of changing how I'm thinking about animals in general. So I was like, oh, at some point I'm going to go vegetarian, and I didn't even know vegan at the time. But when I was older and I learned about how farmed animals are treated within our food system, and I learned about veganism, I was like, okay, well, that's, I have to, kind of commit to being vegan. And at the time, I was doing direct service through a national service program at AmeriCorps, and we were doing service projects in different communities throughout the United States. And when my terms of service ended, I was trying to figure out where am I going from here? What am I doing next? And I learned about farm animal sanctuaries. And because I'd learned about how farmed animals are treated within the food system and had made this commitment to going vegan myself, felt like it was a great opportunity to be of service to farm animals whose harm I'd been complicit in for so long, and hadn't really fully understand or grasp that. So to me, it was kind of like this form of reparative service that I could engage in. But then when I interned there and I actually had the opportunity to get to know the farmed animals at the sanctuaries, to build relationships with them, I was really moved, one, by the power of sanctuary, but also the power of doing this work and having these ongoing relationships with farmed animals and continuing to work on their behalf. And so that's kind of what led me to doing that work with farmed animals. Even when I went to intern and volunteer at the sanctuary, I wasn't planning for that to be my work. But when I got there and I actually experienced it for myself, I was really inspired by it and knew that it was a community and a work that I wanted to continue to be a part of.
Wow. Okay. So that took I wasn't expecting to hear the phrase the power of sanctuary. So, I did not know that I needed to know more about that. But now that you've said it, I now know that I need to know more about the power of sanctuary. Can you go into more detail about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the power of sanctuary is why I do this work. And I think it's this idea of, I think of sanctuary as this idea of a liberatory space, right? What are the places where we can practice the future that we want to aspire toward, the more just, compassionate, and equitable future? Where are the spaces that we have the opportunity to actually practice that and bring what we envision back into our present day and actually experience that for ourselves? So I think this idea of these liberatory spaces, these liberatory practices, liberatory relationships are things that have sustained and inspired social change movements throughout time and in various ways. I think of it in terms of like the beloved community, right? That's a liberatory vision of this type of community where there's this idea of greater racial justice, equity, and compassion. And that's a vision of that. And so it's like, how do we embody that now? How do we practice that now? And so for me, that's the power of sanctuary, is just the opportunity to have these dedicated spaces. Particularly, I think what was really moving for me at the time when I was an intern was that to drive to the sanctuary, you would drive past all of these other farms where there were farmed animals, but they were being used and they were being consumed for food. And to get to this place where it's so different, where we have these different relationships with farmed animals, where we have these relationships of care, where we are attending to them in a caring way and seeking like, what are their needs, what are their wants? And we're seeing them live out their full lives, thinking about how cows cows in the animal agriculture, their lifespan is 2 to 3 years, but for cows at the sanctuary, they live to be, in their late 20s, right? And so just seeing the difference, the stark difference between what happens in this kind of intentional space here versus what happens beyond it, I think is part of what the power of sanctuary is. And there's actually this book we were just kind of discussing among some staff about, it's called Animal Resistance in the Global Capitalist Era. And the author talks about sanctuaries as these spaces of resistance where we can practice multi-species solidarity. And so I think that is, when you go to a sanctuary and you kind of experience that, it is very transformational in a profound way.
Yeah, I can see that, and I actually have experienced some of that, which we can talk about a little bit later. I want to dig into this idea of animals having personhood, which is something I think that you sort of realized pretty early on through your relationship with the puppy. Has working in a farm animal sanctuary setting expanded on that at all for you?
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that really moved me, just because in that sanctuary setting, you're able to see farmed animals expressing themselves and exhibiting their natural behaviors, being themselves, showing their own personalities, their wants, what they don't want, letting you know that they don't want you in their space.
Mm.
Right. So I think there is that. There was also, I think for me, one of the first animals that I met when I was interning was a turkey. And birds and turkeys are some of the animals who we really see how humans have manipulated their bodies to be bred in a certain way to meet human needs, but then that then compromises their health and their well-being. And so some of our caregivers were tending to this particular turkey, and there was just something where I was watching this turkey and seeing how she was kind of being with her body, and what she was experiencing, and just like watching her as they were caring for her and tending to her, looking into her eyes, seeing how she was responding, and with that level of care that they were giving her, I think that really deepened that.
Mm.
Also, having the opportunity to care for animals directly myself. When I was interning, there were 3 lambs that came in, and they were young enough to the point where they needed to be bottle fed every few hours, and staff asked us if we would be willing to bottle feed them in the middle of the night when they had to have their midnight feeding, because
Oh, wow.
they were working during the day, and so for them to wake up in the middle of the night was a lot. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And I think I was one of the only interns that wanted to wake up in the middle of the night to go do that. But there was something about, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, walk across the sanctuary, and open up the treatment trailer, and there would be these 3 beings like calling for me to feed them, and then I would feed them. And there was something about that kind of mutual relationship where I was providing their care, and we had this kind of dynamic that really gave me a different understanding of who they are, and of the human animal relationship there. But what really got me was that, there was this period where I was like feeding them, and I would come in the middle of the night, they would call for me and I would be feeding them. But watching them grow up and seeing them as adults, and like they're living their own lives, they're at the sanctuary now and they're out in the pasture and all of that. And just to witness their growth and them like, oh, now they're out doing their own thing. Um, there's just something about that and being able to exercise agency and who they are and how they live, that I think also moved me. And then being able to think about farmed animals beyond just this group or species, like however many animals, cows or pigs or whatever, consumed for food or slaughtered each year, to actually be able to identify a specific animal. When I'm talking about pigs, now there's this image of, this pig we call Rosa who comes to mind, or Nikki who comes to mind, or this pig we call Andy who comes to mind, right? Just these individuals that really just made it all hit home, instead of just like this large grouping of animals who you can't really identify or connect with. So I think that's kind of, I'm trying not to like ramble on about it, but it's just these opportunities for deeper relationship, that just kind of elevate that understanding of personhood and who they are as their own beings.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, and it's something that people miss, because we're not in close, like most people are not in close proximity, to farmed animals. And so a lot of folks, even if they have had animals in their lives as pets or companion animals, um, they still kind of like compartmentalize farmed animals and other kinds of animals that are used uh as like inanimate objects. And I think that they kind of have to do that because recognizing that personhood in these beings would be catastrophic. You like you wouldn't be able to continue in the same way
Right.
once you recognize that.
Yeah.
And so, you were talking about animals who are brought in, and obviously these are rescue animals. So a lot of them may be coming from some pretty horrific situations, probably weird stuff. Are there any rescue stories other than the lambs? Because I mean, that was a pretty like powerful story. Are there any other stories that stand out for you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, because this book, Animal Resistance in the Global Capitalist Era, is really on my mind, the author was also talking about, um, you know, framing the animal protection, animal liberation movement in terms of, these animal resistors who are trying to escape these oppressive conditions, and then humans working with them in solidarity as accomplices to support them in their own efforts to liberate themselves. And so really centering them in their own movement for liberation in that way. And so I think the rescue stories, or the stories of animals who we've given sanctuary to that come to mind, are really the stories of those animal resistors. So like Queenie is a cow we called Queenie, who came to sanctuary, I believe it was in 2000, who escaped from a slaughterhouse in Queens and was running around through New York. Similarly, another cow with a similar story was Frank, who I believe was in 2016. He escaped slaughter, and also in Queens, New York, and was running around and was able to be brought to sanctuary. Also thinking of another cow, a lot of cows here who've kind of resisted, but Bonnie in 2018, she was a 4-month-old calf, and was at a farm where she was being raised for slaughter, but she was able to escape as well. But she escaped, it wasn't in the city, it was in a more rural setting in New York, and she escaped to the woods and had to figure out how to survive on her own. And so the family who had her and the neighbors knew that she had escaped and that she was living in the woods, but they hadn't been able to successfully capture her. But they did put up cameras to kind of see like how is she, like what's she doing out there, how is she surviving for this long. And actually what they captured was that she had been living with a herd of deer. So
Oh my
she
goodness.
found a way to survive, and they would see her, she would move with this herd of deer, and they were kind of like living together and coexisting together. But ultimately, that wouldn't have been a setting in which she would have been able to continue to survive, especially going into New York winters. So thankfully, our staff was able to kind of come in and give her sanctuary in a setting where she could also be a part of a herd at our shelters, but would have the care that she needed as well. And then one more story, kind of along the lines of that animal resistance as well. Kind of going to another species, is a pig we called Nikki, who came to sanctuary in 2008. And what I really love about her story is just the power and resilience that it shows, and her own strength and determination and will to live. So in her particular story, she was in the Midwest in Iowa, and it was during the summer when there were floods kind of ravaging the area. And so what farmers were doing was that they were kind of just abandoning the facilities and leaving the animals to fend for themselves. And so there were some animal protection groups who came in to try to, take in as many of those animals that they could. And so Nikki was one of those pigs who had escaped, and she was pregnant at the time. And so what she actually did was she somehow got up on a levee and gave birth to her piglets and kept them alive and cared for them for, a number of days before she was able to be was found by some of these animal protection groups and brought to sanctuary. So I think I really love those stories just because they capture that that own will and for them to live and their own resistance, and then us just kind of coming in to support them in that, to act in solidarity and as accomplices to help liberate them and bring them to sanctuary.
Mm. Wow, that is. I was hoping for one story. I mean, but you know what? I can't even imagine that there aren't dozens and dozens and dozens of stories
Mhm.
like these, and it's just so it's really like kind of emotional for me.
Yeah.
um and really inspiring. I mean, even for my own life,
Yeah.
like a lot of us, we've been through a lot and we've overcome a lot. And like for
Yeah.
me, I can see a part of my own story in these stories that you're telling about these animals who have escaped their circumstances,
Mhm.
and through the compassion and kindness of others have found themselves in a different place. So
Yeah,
this is powerful
absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah, and I will say, I didn't really speak on this when I was talking about the power of sanctuary, but for me, when I first came to sanctuary, when I first experienced it, it was at a time when I was really trying to get more of a sense of myself and my own identities as a Black woman, and specifically as a queer Black woman. And so when I came to sanctuary and I saw the liberatory power and potential of that space, we were there and we were kind of rethinking the human animal relationship. But I was also thinking of that potential in terms of just the counter oppressive realities that we could create in general when we're thinking about things in that way. So yeah, absolutely. There was this like deep resonance I felt in terms of my own experience and what I was seeking and looking for and hoping for. So, hearing you speak to that just kind of reminded me of that piece.
Well, thank you so much for that. I hope that these stories can touch other people who wouldn't necessarily even be thinking about these things. I've gotten into a lot of conversations with people, especially like in Black vegan spaces. I'm in a lot of Black vegan spaces, especially like on Facebook and stuff, and these conversations are just now starting to be had. And there's just so many people who are genuinely confused. Like they are perplexed. They're like, this is not something that I have ever thought about. I've never thought about like the experience of animals as individuals. And
Mm-hmm.
so these are such important conversations to be having. And it's really it's just very timely, I
Yeah,
think, as well.
absolutely.
um so in that vein, I hear all the time that people don't think that we should show concern for animals as long as there are humans that are being oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. We've heard that, throughout history. I mean, during, the suffrage movement, it was like, a lot of white women felt like, well, once we get our rights, then we'll focus on, like trying to get rights for the rest of you people. But right, but let us just, get ours, like that kind of thing. And like with Black men, even during the civil rights movement, whenever conversations of like how Black men can be equally oppressive towards Black women, there was just this sort of shutting that down and like, look, let's just do this first and then we'll get to that. So there always seems to be like a, sort of, we can only work on like this one thing, and then eventually like equality will trickle down
Yeah.
to other folks. Did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, trickle down equality. Yeah, I mean, I think it feels important to like really acknowledge where that's coming from, because I think it's important, yeah, to like really uplift and name that within the animal protection movement, within animal rights spaces, it has been common for there to be this messaging of animals first, right? Which, you know, for folks who have marginalized, come from backgrounds where they have different identities and dimensions of their identity and experience, where there is marginalization and oppression, to have this history of engaging with this particular movement where you're getting that messaging. You know, I get people's really hesitation and caution around that, and also the complicated history of how, and not just the history, the present day realities of how, you know, dehumanization, the animalization of marginalized folks is still very real and has lived consequences for folks, in a way that I think makes it challenging to even just like, you're raising the question about, you know, animals when I don't even know like how I'm going to pay rent, especially right now, right? And in the middle of a pandemic, how I'm going to pay rent, how I'm going to feed my family, how to not get shot or whatever it may be, right? And so you're asking me to care about animals in that. So I feel like it's important to really name those pieces that I think are contributing to that experience, in a very like real and valid way, and to also uplift, you know, what Audre Lorde said around how there can be no hierarchy of oppression, right? Understanding the systems of oppression, you understand how they're interrelated, right? So we can't focus on these single issues and then really think that we can address the root causes that are perpetuating all of these harms, right? And so being able to engage in this work where we are consistently counter oppressive. Like for me, you know, as I mentioned, when I first came to like the sanctuary world, I was kind of contending with, you know, I'm a, I'm a woman, I'm a Black woman, I'm a queer Black woman, right? And so was coming from this place of, you know, all of these dimensions of my identity that where there was this kind of pattern of oppression and marginalization and all of that. And when I learned about how farm animals are treated, realized that, well, how they're treated is aligning with my understanding of oppression. And I have a personal commitment for my own survival to commit to countering oppression. And so because I recognize this as oppression, I'm also committing to countering this in whatever ways I can. So, you know, recognizing the interrelated nature of oppression, how that is necessary for us all to liberate ourselves. Like that co-liberation is how liberation happens, period. It doesn't happen otherwise. And it also makes me think, I feel like I'm pulling a lot of like quotes and things like that. But I think there are just so many people who've talked about these things in a very eloquent and powerful way. So I want to bring them in. But Lela Watson, who there's a quote from her that says, if you've come to help me, if you've come to help me, what is the quote? If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together, right? So it's that piece of the importance of solidarity, of coalition building, of building these communities of shared practice, of shared values. Like that's necessary for the liberation work. So I think, you know, it's recognizing what's the place people are coming from, where they're saying like, I can't be thinking about, you know, animals when I'm just trying to feed myself and my family, or worry about how I'm not going to get killed in this particular situation. Recognizing that, and then also recognizing the importance of us consistently and holistically countering oppression in all its forms.
Mm, mm, mm. This is some. I mean, I was gonna say this is some heavy stuff, but it's not heavy. It's just like deep. We're digging down. Yeah. So a couple of just my recent personal experiences with these same folks that Black folks that are now exploring veganism, exploring plant-based eating, just really, really interested in learning more and being in groups of people who are talking about these types of things. I've noticed a couple of really interesting things. One, I was in a group and there was some kind of post about a woman who had made these banana cream pies and she brought them to a potluck and everybody ate them and they thought that they were so delicious. And then after the pies were eaten, she revealed to them that she had run out of cow milk. So she had made the pies with breast milk, her own lactation.
Mhm.
And people were freaking out, they were just flipping out, they were just couldn't it was so upsetting to people. And one of the sort of themes that kept coming up about this was that they had not consented to
Mhm.
consuming her breast milk.
Mhm.
And it just kept coming up, consent, consent, consent. And so I kind of I didn't do it. I didn't do it because I guess I just didn't feel like getting beat up that particular day. And I mean, sometimes I'm, like I got time, and it's
Yeah.
like, all right, I know they're gonna beat me up, but I gotta say it.
Yeah.
But it just like the fact that, and it's almost like they kept almost getting there, and then just like completely missing the mark. But and so I really, really wanted to just bring forth this idea, like, hey, yeah, this is a great conversation about consent, and I think that it's important to be talking about this. However, nobody is addressing the lactating cow in the room, which is like this being that obviously is not giving her consent at all to be engaging in having us engaging with her in this way. And so it's so clear to see that these people who had been duped into consuming someone's breast milk had been completely violated. I mean, some people were just like, they should have beat her up and all this stuff, because they had been so violated by having been tricked into consuming the milk of this human woman, whereas nobody, like everybody, just completely missed this idea of consent when it came to the cow's milk that she ran out of.
Mhm.
And so it and it's difficult, like you were saying, there's all these reasons, right?
Mhm.
And so I would never deny people their reasons for feeling the way that they feel. I mean,
Mhm.
we have all this like genetic memory, even, of horrible experiences with during our enslavement and after, with animals being either pitting us against animals, being made to feel like we were lesser than animals, and then having animals be the tool of hunting us down, of
Mhm.
oppressing us, of doing harm to us. Even to this day, police dogs and police horses are used during our protests, to intimidate, and sometimes even harm us. And so it's just like, it's very complicated.
Yeah.
It's very complicated. It's not simple. And I think that people just get very, I know that people get very emotional, and they immediately want to shut this conversation down.
Mhm.
And so I just, it's really important to me, and I'm so thankful to you for being here and being available to talk about these issues, because I think a lot of times those of us who are bringing up these issues and just trying to like kind of put it on the table are just immediately dismissed or immediately demonized, and made out to be someone who doesn't care about people, because how could you possibly care about people if you're trying to advocate for animals in any way?
Mhm.
And so like the points that you made were very, very poignant, and just a lot to think about. And I'm hoping that that's what will happen with this particular session, is that people will walk away with food for thought,
Mhm.
because you know oppression, you were saying that, like, just being able to identify oppression. I mean, you can look at just some of the practices,
Yeah.
just like standard practices that are used in animal agriculture, and you can connect them directly back to like horrible atrocities and oppressive systems throughout history. And I think there's something really important to look at there.
Mhm.
Um so you know so I went vegan. There's a lot of animal rights activists who would not give me that. Like they would be like, you weren't vegan, you were plant-based, you know. But you know, it was like over 20 years ago. And it was not about animals per se. It was about like oneness with everything, right? So it was like, you know, the sacred body and, you know, being one with the universe, you know, like that kind of thing. But it wasn't specifically like, you know, animals are being oppressed and we have to do something about it. And so, you know, over time, you know, people get really pretty worked up right now. People within the vegan movement get pretty worked up about people's reason for identifying as vegan. And it's like, you know, if it doesn't have anything to do with animals, then it shouldn't even be on the table. But I kind of feel like one could, and people do, embark on this lifestyle, and embark on this way of being, for other reasons, and then just sort of have like information filters in, you know, from other places, and it just sort of changes their perspective. And one of the places that I know that that happens is animal sanctuaries. I
Mhm.
have experienced it myself. I have seen it, you know, in other people, because, you know, I've actually done programs like vegan pledge programs, and other programs where I've taken groups of people to animal sanctuaries, and just seeing how transformative that is. I mean, I have so many tearjerker stories, you know,
Mhm.
that I could tell. But this isn't about me; it's about you. But you know, I have I have so many stories about people who, like, when they may have even been on the fence about this vegan thing. Like, you know, I feel you, I hear you, I hear all the reasons and blah blah blah. But like once they were around those animals and interacting with them, that was the thing that sort of took them, you know, like all the way to the finish line. So why do you think that that is?
Hmm. Yeah, so I'm gonna sit with that for a moment. Well, I could start answering it, but I think there's more too that's coming. But I think a piece of it is what I spoke of a little bit earlier about, you know, you think of it, oh, cows, pigs, chickens, whatever, but it's different when you're faced with this particular individual. You have an individual, you hear their story, you know, you see them with their family, with their offspring, and you see them in a setting where they are living a life that isn't based upon their usefulness to humans. You see them living with agency, you see them living with purpose, you see them experiencing fulfillment in ways that are aligned with, you know, their species specific experience of fulfillment and whatever that is for them. And so I think there's something about that clicks. You know, it's not just this like, you know, abstract idea of these animals, but you actually see them as beings. On top of, though, a particular narrative that's also shared, right? Like you go into this setting, and with it being a sanctuary, you come into this setting and you have the opportunity to meet and interact with these beings, and to hear them in their stories within the context of an environment where a certain framework is being put forward of more just, compassionate, and equitable relationships with them,
Mm,
right? Because I think I want to distinguish here between this story or this idea of like, what if slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would be a vegetarian. That's not necessarily true. You know, like people can see them being slaughtered, or even, you know, do the slaughtering directly or whatever. Or you know, a family member of mine came to the sanctuary and like patted like a goat on the head and was like, okay, that's it, I'm just not an animal person, I just don't really care about animals, and that's just me, right? And so for some people that's the case. But I think there's something specific about being in that space and the larger story, the larger community, the larger conversation that is had, which I, again, is that piece of like a liberatory space, right? There's an intentionality around it. You know, we're here and we're in relationship, but we're having certain conversations. And we're engaging in certain practices, and we embody certain values that come through in that space, that are felt in that space. So it's not necessarily just about the interactions with the animals, though for some people it is, but for others it's what they're hearing. For others it's, you know, being able to hear stories directly from staff or tour guides or other people who are there talking about their experiences going vegan or making these choices or why they did. You know, I think it's just all of these pieces around this community, because I think when it comes to transformative change, when it comes to social change, it is really about these communities that we have, whether, you know, we're exploring and learning together, whether we're committing to these values and practices together. We do that in relationship, you know, with non-human animals or with each other. And so I think it's just the collection of all of those pieces together that kind of have that effect.
You know, and thank you for that. You just made me think about something that I hadn't thought about when I was trying to come up with like the kinds of questions that I wanted to ask you. And that is this idea that these animals oftentimes, probably more times than not, are coming out of situations in which they were traumatized by humans.
Hmm.
And you know, like I personally have seen so many transformations that people have experienced through just being in close proximity to these rescued farmmen. I mean, I've seen people who came in hostile, you know, like just look, I'm here because my wife made me come, but like I don't like animals. I'm not and like literally by the end of the tour being like, wow, I don't appreciate the fact that y'all got me thinking about these things, and I guess I'm gonna try to be vegan, you know, and just really seeing that transformation over and over and over again. But it also makes me think like, what is the responsibility that we have to the animals themselves to
Hmm.
make sure that there's some kind of buffer or some kind of distance that some animals might need to have from humans based on their experiences with us.
Hmm. Yes, that's so real, and that's very important. And I think one that we should continually be engaging in, because it's a yeah, there's so many different pieces to that. I think part of what one of the realizations that has come to me more deeply doing sanctuary work is one, the limitations of my own understanding because of my human privilege, right? And how it is necessary to always be engaging in the work of how I can and we as humans can better understand and respond to and honor and attend to the needs of non-human animals, particularly non-human animals who we are providing sanctuary to and providing care for. And so I think there's that piece of, you know, if we are really allies, if we are really working in solidarity with you know, this community, this multi-species community where there is that solidarity, yeah, what is our responsibility as far as how they interact with people or how people interact with them? So I think that's an important part of, you know, when we do have people come to the sanctuary saying who wants to be interacted with and who doesn't, right? If they don't come up to you, they don't want to be interacted with, and we respect that. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you have our tour guides on the tour, that is their responsibility, to be the allies, or, you know, to be working in solidarity with the non-human animals in that space and ensuring that their wants and their needs and desires are being honored in that way. Or, you know, if an animal does not want to be interacting with humans, then, you know, they're just not even in a space where they're having to come into contact with guests, right? So I think that's an ongoing part of the work. You know, it's never a point where we're like, okay, we figured it out, or, you know, I'm vegan or I'm an animal rights person, so I know everything about how to be just, compassionate, and fair to non-human animals. I got it. You know, it is this continuous thing of like re-examining, just like with any dimension of our identity or experience where we have that level of privilege, we have a responsibility to continue learning, to continue reflecting, and to continue growing and evolving, to do better all the time. Like even with the dogs I share my life with, who are sleeping over here and snoring, there's a way that I'm always kind of like trying to navigate the piece of, you know, what are ways that I may be exerting my own wants and
Mm-hmm.
desires over them, and like what do they want, you know, like You know, even just something as small as the dog here, who I call Kaya, running in the backyard, and I'm like, we need to come inside, and she's like not wanting to come in and wanting more time. You know, what does it mean for me to be like, okay, she wants more time, like I could give her that, like I don't have to, you know, be like it's my way or the highway, right? So I think it's just an ongoing thing. It's important, it's critical, especially in sanctuary spaces where, you know, that's the space within the vegan movement, within, you know, our country, where we have that kind of close proximity with non-human animals in that way. That's an important part of that work, and it's something that must be ongoing, you know, us continuing to do that kind of reflection and growth.
Okay. Yeah, you know, I have 3 cats living here. Well, I guess I they let me live in their space. And you know, it's a constant battle. It's like I'm always trying to figure out like what do you want from me, and like what you want from me right now is not necessarily what you're going to want from me in like literally 2 seconds, you know.
Right.
And trying to figure out like how do I, you know, like work within whatever it is that they want without, you know, because if it was up to me, I would just be like squishing their little faces all day and just like, you know,
Yeah.
you know, because that's what I want to do, but
Yeah.
that is not what they want to do ever. So I can definitely relate to what you're saying. Um, so you know, I was in your bio. There was all this stuff about, you know, your position with Farm Sanctuary and how you are creating programs, like really, really important programs. And I happen to be privy to a particular program that you are developing with some other team members. And it's called social justice and our food system, which is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart as a food justice activist who is, you know, working on these issues through a vegan lens. You know, the more people I can connect with who are doing this work, the better, because in the food justice arena, there just aren't that many people who are looking at these issues around food justice through a vegan lens, and just even open to the idea that this is a way that we can look at it.
Mhm.
So can you tell us about, I don't know, you know, if you're at the place where you're ready to tell people, but it's coming up. And so I was just wondering, like, can you tell people about the program and what inspired you to want to do this?
Yeah. So thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, it's the social justice in our food system. It's a free 10-week virtual community learning program, and I'm excited to have you as one of the speakers as a part of that program to highlight your work and for you to be able to share about that. But the idea of it is, you know, kind of echoing a lot of what I've said about the importance of community when we're thinking about this work, when we're thinking about social change. So in all of the various different roles that I've had within Farm Sanctuary, and even, you know, prior to my work with Farm Sanctuary, and I've been with Farm Sanctuary for 5 years, kind of what has been a reoccurring theme is people coming to the sanctuary seeking community, like-minded community, to be able to learn about these issues and to be able to do so in a way that reflects this kind of social justice framework of how these issues are interrelated. You know, how the treatment of farm animals is a reflection of larger patterns of harm within our food system, in our larger society as a whole. You know, so people wanting that community, wanting to have a deeper understanding of, you know, this kind of social justice framework for how we're thinking about these issues, and specifically wanting to have this opportunity where we can engage in that co-learning together, and then think together, brainstorm together, you know, kind of strategize together about how we can take that learning and apply it in practice, right? Because I tend to talk about veganism as a practice, like my vegan practice,
Mm.
and a vegan praxis, right? So how do we kind of cultivate this vegan praxis that is striving to be counter oppressive, that has this kind of understanding and is informed by this kind of understanding. So I think there are just a lot of different communities and individuals that I was encountering who are wanting more of this kind of intentional space. And so the idea with this community learning program was like, okay, let's do that. You know, people are talking about what they want, and so let's kind of create that space for them, particularly in an accessible way, you know, intentionally having it be virtual, because not everyone has the opportunity want to connect with that kind of community. Not everyone has the opportunity to come and visit the sanctuary. So the idea is that this will be a way to kind of be able to establish that for people in a way where we as farm sanctuary staff are facilitating that opportunity. So, sanctuary being a space where we can kind of serve as a container for these conversations and for, to highlight, a major facet of the program is that we're having different speakers, they're reading different books and kind of uplifting all of the amazing, incredible people and organizations who are doing essential work in this movement, and creating a space for them to learn about them, right? And then be able to apply it. So it's like, okay, as a sanctuary, in some ways, it feels like our role is to create these spaces and to facilitate them. So this isn't a program where it's like, oh, farm sanctuary is coming in and we're saying, this is what social justice in our food system looks like, and this is what it is, and this is the only way you can think about it. It's really saying, like, here are all these voices and perspectives and ideas with their diverse experience. Let's learn from them together and see what comes of it. So that's the idea of the program. And as I said, it's kind of structured in 10 weeks. This first iteration of the program starts in March and runs to May. And then from this iteration of the program, we're going to potentially kind of expand it from there and have multiple cohorts going forward with, maybe potentially exploring different topics or things like that, but really wanting to explore sanctuary as a space where we can have these kind of communities where we're engaging in this co-learning, building these positive relationships, and then thinking about how we can bring this future that we aspire toward back to our present day to actually be a lived reality.
I am so excited. I mean, it's such a powerful premise, and I'm so happy to be a part of it, and I can't wait to see how it, just turns out and blossoms into something that I know is going to be amazing. And I just wanted to ask, like, if people do you still have openings, or are you done?
Yeah, so our applications for this first cohort are closed. We just closed them this week, but if people sign up on Farm Sanctuary's website for our newsletter, they'll be updated about future offerings of this particular program, as well as, other offerings that we have. But that's where they'll be able to find out the next time that we're offering it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that is, I mean, I feel like we have really covered a lot, covered a lot of ground here. And I'm just so thankful again that you took the time. I know that, the folks who are able to watch, this particular session are just going to learn so much, and that it's going to open up new conversations about these topics that need to be had at this time. We may not all agree all at the same time, but I think that, it betters us all to be talking about these issues and growing. So thank you so much, Miko, for taking the time to participate. And if folks want to connect with you or find you, is there anywhere that they can find you right now?
Yeah, I think the best way to find me would be Farm Sanctuary.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
The content and programming that we have there. Again, signing up for the newsletter, you'll see opportunities and the different programming that I'm creating, and the opportunity for us to connect and be in community there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And, I plan to be working with you a lot more in the future, both through Farm Sanctuary and through Afro Vegan Society.
Yes, I love it. Thank you so much, Brenda. It's been great being in conversation with you.
All right.